When we talk about the requirement for design professionals to be licensed and design firms to be registered, the requirements can vary wildly from design discipline to design discipline and from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But one thing that almost every jurisdiction is singularly focused on is ensuring the public health, safety, and welfare is safeguarded when design professionals are providing their services. Essentially, that only qualified people be authorized to engage in providing architecture or engineering, as the case may be. And while the laws and the rules differ wildly from state to state, and really even within the state of Illinois, from one discipline to the next, the rules can vary tremendously. But one thing that you tend to see in most jurisdictions, including Illinois, is a focus on ensuring that some licensed person, somebody who is qualified by dint of education and experience, is going to be in responsible control of things such as technical submissions. Essentially, that there be somebody who has studied architecture engineering and is licensed so that they're able to make good decisions. Some states are more progressive than others when it comes to what types of ways they will allow professional services to be provided. For example, some states recognize that it's not the case anymore that all design services are going to be provided by a design team that's comprised of architects and engineers who are in a contractual relationship with the owner. Some states recognize concepts like delegated design or design assist. And here in Illinois, the rules, or at least some of them, which govern architecture and engineering, recognize that it's increasingly common for owners to hire a single design builder to provide both design and construction services. And in some cases, that single entity might not be a registered design firm. In Illinois, while it's not exactly on the cutting edge, does recognize in certain circumstances that it's okay for design services to be provided through a design builder that's not a registered design firm, as long as there is a registered design firm beneath it that is providing services in the way that the law envisions. And it's not just the rules in Illinois for architecture, engineering, and surveying. It's not just the design professional specific rules that design firms need to be concerned with. They need to understand that if they're going to provide professional services in the state of Illinois, they need to be authorized by the Illinois Secretary of State to transact business in Illinois, which means they need to be concerned with things like the Business Corporations Act of 1983. And since we're talking about providing professional services, there's also the Professional Services Corporation Act, which, interestingly enough, has some requirements that are similar to the specific rules and regulations that are written aimed at architecture and engineering. In other words, the Professional Services Corporation Act has a variety of requirements concerning ownership and control of design firms by licensed professionals. And the reason why the entity that promulgates many of these design-specific rules and enforces them, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, is concerned with design firm registration is the notion that design services are going to be provided by an entity rather than a person, right? It's the corporate practice of architecture or the corporate practice of engineering. And what these rules and laws tend to concern themselves with, among other things, is that there be some person within the corporation that is in charge of providing these professional services, that there is a licensed person who is the managing agent for architecture engineering, as the case may be. In some cases, it's required that that person sit physically in Illinois. In some cases, it's required that there be an Illinois office physically in Illinois for the design firm. And I would caution anyone that's watching this that the requirements for architecture firms are different than the requirements for professional engineering firms, or different than the requirement for structural engineering firms, are different than the requirement for land surveying firms. And so you can't paint in broad brushstrokes here, but if we were to focus, for example, on the requirements for registration of architecture firms, if you look at the ID FPR literature, if you are going to provide architectural services through an entity like an LLC or a company, that company needs to be registered as a professional design firm in the state of Illinois, okay? And each Illinois office of the firm has got to have a resident architect that is licensed in Illinois. and there needs to be a managing agent that is in responsible charge of the practice of architecture. This is a full-time employee, not just of a larger corporate entity, but of the specific entity that's registered in Illinois as a design firm. And there are other requirements, the resident architect, the managing agent, needs to be senior. They need to be a director of the company or a member of the LLC or a partner of the partnership. And there are other requirements that really are keyed off this concept of the corporate practice of providing design services. For architecture firms, 2/3 of the board of directors or the members of the LLC or the partners in a partnership need to be licensed as a design professional because, again, you do not want to have a situation where the people who are at the top of the corporation are business people or investors or somebody who is perhaps not qualified by dint of licensure and education and practice to exercise responsible control over technical submissions. You want to make sure that there's somebody at the top where the buck is going to stop with that person for the practice of architecture in compliance with Illinois' laws and rules and regulations for the corporate practice of architecture. And of course, if that design firm is going to provide architecture in Illinois, they need to be authorized by the Secretary of State to transact business. So again, that gets you back into the Business Corporations Act, it gets you into the Professional Services Corporations Act. And so, these rules and regulations are complicated. I think that there's an instinct for people to be really myopic and to try to read one rule and say, oh, that doesn't describe what I'm doing, it doesn't apply. I would just caution people that the rules and regulations for providing design services in Illinois, licensure and registration, they're broad, they're complicated. The IDFPR has cast a comparatively wide net, and they've got considerable powers over architects and engineers and surveyors and other design professionals that project their design services into projects within the state of Illinois.